A refueling truck sits parked beside a bomber-sized aircraft on an open concrete apron in southern Russia. Its 4 turbofan engines are cold. The saucer-shaped radar dome bolted above the fuselage, 12 meters across, has stopped turning. For the next 90 minutes, this aircraft cannot detect a single object in the sky above it, including the drones now crossing the Sea of Azov to find it. This is a Beriev A-50U. NATO calls it Mainstay. Russia has fewer than 8 of these aircraft flying anywhere in the world, and each one costs close to $330 million to build. Lose enough of them, and an entire stretch of Russian-controlled airspace goes blind. Ukraine did not chase this aircraft through the sky. It waited for the aircraft to sit still. What follows is the story of 11 nights spent watching a single airfield. A routine one Russian radar crew kept repeating without realizing it was being logged, and the 90-minute refueling stop that turned the most valuable early warning aircraft in southern Russia into a target that could not look back. It starts with a notebook, not a drone. Taganrog sits on the northern shore of the Sea of Azov, inside Russia's Rostov region, roughly 140 kilometers from the nearest stretch of Ukrainian-held ground. It isn't a frontline city, it's a factory town. The Beriev aircraft plant there, known by its full designation Tank Beriev, has built and overhauled Russia's airborne radar fleet since the late Soviet period. When an A-50 needs its avionics refitted or its crew rotated, Taganrog is where it goes. That made the airfield a magnet for a reconnaissance cell working under Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, the agency known as HER. Field officers who've worked alongside the cell call it Group 13. Officially, HER doesn't confirm the name exists. Its lead analyst went by the callsign Sokil, Ukrainian for Falcon. 31 years old. Before the war, he taught aviation logistics at a technical college in Dnipro. Now he tracks the flight habits of an aircraft that used to appear only in his lecture slides. An A-50 isn't a bomber, and it doesn't fire a shot. It's a flying radar station, capable of tracking hundreds of aircraft and missiles at once from up to 600 kilometers away, then handing that picture to Russian Su-35 fighters so they can intercept Ukrainian jets and cruise missiles before either gets near Russian territory. Take the A-50 out of the sky over a sector, and Russian pilots fall back on ground radar with a fraction of the range and none of the altitude advantage. Russia already knows what that costs. On January 14, 2024, an A-50U went down over the Sea of Azov, destroyed by what Ukrainian officials described as a long-range surface-to-air ambush. On February 23 of that same year, a second Mainstay took heavy damage over Krasnodar territory and barely made it home. 2 aircraft, in 6 weeks, out of a fleet that never had more than a dozen in flying condition to begin with. After that, the surviving A-50s stopped flying anywhere near the front. They pulled back to bases the Russian Air Force considered safe. Taganrog was one of them, 140 kilometers from Ukrainian lines, and, until now, out of reach of anything Kyiv could put in the air with any accuracy. Sokil's job was to find out whether that assumption still held. Since 2023, Ukraine's long-range drone program has hit more than 24 Russian airfields, oil terminals and radar sites, some of them over 1,000 kilometers from the border. And most of those strikes used a single airframe family that Ukrainian officials still won't fully unclassify. A slow, propeller-driven, low-signature drone called Lyutyi, the Fierce One. It costs a fraction of what it destroys. Sokil's target would put that math to its harshest test yet. The watch started on a Tuesday in late spring. Group 13 had one real advantage going in: the aircraft's own discipline. Every morning before dawn, an A-50 lifted off from Taganrog south and flew a patrol track over the Sea of Azov, watching Ukrainian airspace from international waters. Every morning, it came back to the same runway, taxied to the same stretch of apron, and sat down beside a fuel bowser for what ground crews on the open radio net called a hot turn, refuel, Crew swap. Radio check. Airborne again, inside roughly 90 minutes. 9 mornings running, the pattern held to within 11 minutes of the same clock time. Sokil started logging it not because he expected to strike the airfield, but because a Group 13 handler had asked every recon cell in the south to flag anything that looked like a fixed schedule near a high-value target. An A-50 sitting still for 90 minutes, in daylight, on an open apron, was exactly that. Getting the pattern was the easy part. Confirming it, night after night, from 140 kilometers away, was not. Before the watch even had a name, it had a setup problem. Group 13 didn't have a fixed listening post anywhere near Taganrog, so Patashka's truck moved every 36 hours along a rotation of 5 parking spots inside Ukrainian-held territory. None of them ever used twice in a row. Each move cost her roughly 90 minutes of dead air while she re-erected a directional antenna and retuned to the frequency band the airfield's ground controllers preferred that week. Russian electronic warfare units swept the border zone constantly, hunting for exactly the kind of steady signal a fixed listening post would produce. And twice during the 11-night watch, a suspected EW sweep forced her to go dark for a full night, rather than risk giving away her position for one more transcript. The cell had no eyes inside the airfield perimeter. Satellite passes over Taganrog came twice a day at best, and cloud cover across the Sea of Azov in early spring wiped out 3 of the first 10 passes entirely. For 6 straight days, Sokil had nothing but a radio intercept, a Russian ground controller's voice, picked up by a signals specialist who used the call sign Patashka and worked out of a truck parked near the line of contact. Sokil built the entire refueling window off that voice alone, without a single image to confirm it. I went through the intercept transcripts from that stretch myself, and one detail kept nagging at me. The controller never once used a proper call sign for the aircraft. Just the regular, every single day. That's not radio discipline. That's a crew that had stopped thinking about who might be listening. Then, on night 10, the aircraft didn't come home. No return call, no landing chatter, nothing on the frequency Patashka had been monitoring for a week and a half. For 6 hours, Sokil didn't know if the A-50 had diverted to a different base, gone into deep maintenance, or simply broken its schedule the one night it mattered least to stay consistent. Every piece of the pattern he'd built looked, for those 6 hours, like it might collapse. It didn't. A source inside Ukraine's ATESH network, a loose grid of Russian and occupied territory civilians who pass along photographs, overheard conversations, and license plate sightings near military sites, sent word that the A-50 had simply flown a longer patrol that day, tracking a Ukrainian reconnaissance flight further out over the Black Sea than usual. It landed 4 hours late. The next morning, it was back on the old schedule, like nothing had happened. That single deviation told Sokil more than 9 perfect nights had. The crew wasn't following a fixed order handed down from above. They were following comfort. And comfort, on a battlefield being watched from space, is a liability that doesn't fix itself. 9 days later, the ATESH contact went silent. For 4 straight nights, no photographs, no sightings, no confirmation that the Fuel Bowser crew was still working the same shift. Sokil's handler assumed the worst, that the source had been detained in one of the periodic security sweeps the FSB ran through Taganrog's factory district whenever equipment losses spiked elsewhere in the country. Losing that source didn't just cost intelligence. It meant the one person capable of confirming, in real time, that the target hadn't shifted its routine, had gone dark right as the operation moved toward approval. On the 5th night, a different courier passed word through an intermediary in occupied Mariupol. The contact was fine. A relative's wedding, nothing more, and a decision to stay off the network until the celebration passed. Sokil logged the relief in 3 words in his notebook. Source confirmed alive. Then he went back to building the case. The source herself, a woman in her 40s who worked administrative shifts at a supply depot 2 kilometers from the airfield fence, had been passing sightings to ATESH for over a year by then, ever since a nephew serving in a Ukrainian territorial defense unit near Kharkiv was killed by a Russian glide bomb. She never asked what her photographs were used for, and never wanted to know. She photographed the fuel bowser from her car window on the way to work, logged the license plate of whichever staff vehicle was parked nearest the apron that morning, and deleted the images from her phone within the hour. Group 13 never learned her name. Sokil's file lists her only by source designation, and that designation is the only trace of her that exists in any Ukrainian record. By night 11, 3 separate threads confirmed the same 90-minute window. The radio intercepts, 2 clean satellite passes showing the aircraft parked in an identical position on both, and an ATESH photograph, taken from a car parked outside the airfield fence, of the same fuel bowser crew on shift, twice in the same week. Sokil had his target. What he didn't have yet was a green light. Most people assume a strike like this comes together within days of a target being confirmed. It doesn't. Approval for a hit on a $330 million strategic asset inside Russian territory runs through more than one desk in Kyiv, and every desk wants its own confirmation before signing off. Sokil's file sat for 9 additional days while a separate team cross-checked his intercepts against a second source that neither he nor Patashka was ever told about. Here's what strikes us about that delay. It's tempting to read 9 days of waiting as bureaucratic caution, and in a narrow sense it was exactly that. It's also the reason the strike worked. Hitting a moving pattern before it's independently confirmed twice is how you burn 12 drones on an aircraft that quietly changed its schedule the week before. Approval came on a Thursday evening. The strike would go in 2 nights, timed to the 90-minute window Sokil had tracked for nearly 2 weeks straight. The aircraft that would fly the mission wasn't built for speed or stealth. Lyutyi is a propeller-driven, low-radar signature airframe that Ukraine's defense industry has been quietly scaling up since 2023. Cruising speed under 200 kilometers per hour, range beyond 1,000 kilometers on internal fuel. A warhead in the 50-kilogram class, small next to a cruise missile, but enough to cripple an unarmored radar dome or ignite an exposed fuel bowser. Cost, according to Ukrainian defense industry estimates, roughly $240,000 per unit. 12 of them would cost less than 1% of the aircraft they were being sent to destroy. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback. Guarding a $330 million surveillance plane with the same fuel truck crew, the same 90-minute hot turn, and the same open apron for 11 straight days isn't bad luck. It's negligence. Somewhere in the southern military district, an officer signed off on that routine, and that officer should be explaining himself right now instead of blaming a $240,000 drone for exploiting it. Ground crews at Taganrog spent the 2 nights before the strike exactly as they had for weeks. Same fuel bowser, same rotation of technicians. No sign anyone had noticed a pattern of satellite passes, radio triangulation, or a parked car outside the fence line photographing the apron more often than tourists ever do. 12 Lyutyi drones launched from a concealed position in Ukrainian-held Zaporizhia region, roughly 2 hours before dawn on the 12th night. They flew low, under 30 meters for most of the route, to stay beneath the radar horizon of the air defense batteries screening the Azov coast. An S-400 battalion positioned inland from Taganrog, a Pantsir S-1 short-range system guarding the airfield itself, and mobile Tor M2 units that rotate along the coastal road on a schedule Group 13 had also been tracking for months. Each of the 12 airframes carried a preloaded aim point, rather than a live video feed. A deliberate choice since a real-time control link is the easiest thing for Russian electronic warfare to jam over open water. Sokil's team built those aim points from the same satellite geometry that had confirmed the aircraft's parking spot, cross-referencing the exact apron coordinates against the fuel bowser's position in the ATESH photographs. so that, even if the primary target had moved by a few meters overnight, the fallback coordinates still fell somewhere on the airframe or the fuel line beside it. Would you have noticed 11 identical mornings as a pattern? Or would you have waited for a 12th to be sure? Sokil didn't get the luxury of waiting. The window he'd built the entire operation around was about to close, whether the strike was ready or not. At 02:10, the first pair of drones crossed the Sea of Azov coastline west of Taganrog. Ground-based air defense picked up nothing. The formation held its wave-top altitude, using radar clutter off the water to mask its approach until the final 10 kilometers. At 02:24, a Pantsir S-1 crew near the airfield's northern perimeter caught a fleeting radar return, fired 2 interceptor rounds, and brought down 1 Lyutyi short of the fence line. It was the only drone Russian air defense would stop that night. The remaining 11 kept coming. Inside the airfield, the A-50U sat exactly where Sokil's pattern said it would. Parked on the eastern apron, refueling hose still connected, ground crew standing nearby with a checklist. Its radar dome was stationary. Its engines were shut down. It had no independent way to detect what was closing on it from the water, the very capability it existed to give everyone else. At 02:41, the first Lyutyi struck the fuel bowser parked alongside the aircraft's left wing. The explosion tore through several thousand liters of aviation fuel and threw burning debris across the apron. A second drone, arriving 19 seconds later, hit the fuselage just aft of the cockpit, close to the radar dome's support structure. Ground personnel who survived the strike, according to intercepted post-attack chatter, described the dome coming apart like a broken umbrella. 3 more drones struck a nearby hangar believed to house spare avionics for the Beriev overhaul line, the same building linked to the aircraft's most recent refit. The remaining Lyutyi drones in the wave, redirected to contingency aim points once their primary targets were already burning, hit fuel storage tanks and a radar support vehicle parked near the taxiway. By 03:05, the strike was over. By 03:22, the last of the fires along the apron had been beaten back enough for a damage control team to approach on foot. Satellite imagery captured the following afternoon showed the A-50U's airframe scorched along its full length, the radar dome partially collapsed, and a crater consistent with a fuel-fed fire where the bowser had stood. The damage control crew that reached the aircraft first found the ground technician who had been standing nearest the fuel line during the first impact, burned across both arms, but alive, having thrown himself into a drainage ditch running along the apron's edge the instant the bowser lit up. Base security debriefed him for nearly 6 hours, before releasing him to the airfield's medical unit, less concerned with his injuries than with how a strike had reached the apron without a single air raid siren sounding beforehand. According to a partial transcript that later circulated among open-source analysts, his answer to why no one had raised an alarm was simple. Nobody had ever drilled for one, because nobody expected drones to reach that far inland in the first place. Russia's Ministry of Defense did not confirm the loss of an A-50 that week. It rarely does. What it confirmed instead, in a brief statement 3 days later, was an unspecified drone incident at an airfield in Rostov region that caused, in its words, no critical damage to military infrastructure. Analysts who track Russian aviation losses through open-source satellite imagery reached a different conclusion. Damage assessment teams flagged the airframe as a probable write-off, heavily burned, its radar systems almost certainly destroyed, its return to service unlikely even with a full rebuild. One British Defense Intelligence assessment, published days after similar strikes earlier in the war, put it plainly: "We cannot explain how they keep finding these aircraft on the ground." That line was written about a different airfield, months earlier. At Taganrog, it applied just as well. If the write-off assessment holds, this is the 3rd mainstay Russia has lost, or effectively lost in roughly 18 months, out of a fleet that started this war with fewer than a dozen airworthy, and now, by most independent counts, has 5 or 6 left that can fly a full mission. Replacing them isn't simple. Western export controls on the semiconductors used in the A-50's radar processors have slowed new production to a crawl, and Beriev, the same plant that was supposed to keep this aircraft flying, hasn't delivered a new-build A-50U to the Russian Air Force in years. Here's what this tells us about where this war actually is. 4 years in. The most damaging weapon in this theater isn't the drone that cost $240,000. It's the routine that let it find its target. The same fuel crew, the same 90-minute window, the same open apron, 11 mornings running. Militaries under sustained pressure fall into rhythms, because rhythms are easier to run than constant improvisation. Rhythm is also a signature, and somebody is always watching for one. For Russian fighter squadrons operating over the southern front, the practical effect showed up within days. Su-35 patrols that had relied on A-50 radar cueing to intercept Ukrainian strike aircraft started flying with noticeably less warning time, according to Ukrainian Air Force officers monitoring the sector. Coverage gaps that used to be measured in minutes stretched toward half an hour in places. It won't ground the Russian Air Force. It does mean more Ukrainian sorties get through sectors that used to be watched around the clock. Sokil's cell moved on to a different airfield within the week. Group 13 doesn't take victory laps, and the analyst who spent 11 nights logging a stranger's refueling schedule was reportedly already 3 targets deep into a new file by the time satellite images of the burned Taganrog apron started circulating among open-source analysts. Is this what modern deterrence actually looks like, or just an expensive game of patience that both sides can eventually learn to play? We're not sure there's a clean answer. What's certain is that for one radar crew at Taganrog, 11 mornings of routine cost them the aircraft they were supposed to be protecting. Will Russia still have a single, fully mission-capable A-50 left by the end of this year? Comment yes or no. We'll pin the best argument from either side. What took down a $330 million aircraft in this story wasn't stealth technology or a longer-range missile. It was patience, 11 nights of watching a habit that never should have existed, and a 12th night that arrived exactly on schedule, just not the schedule the Russian crew thought they were keeping. If you want the story of what happened to the other 5 airworthy mainstays still flying tonight, that one's next. Subscribe, and we'll take you there.